On a Saturday morning in October 1963, a machinist named Earl Kowalski backed his Chevrolet into the driveway of his house in Akron, Ohio, opened the trunk, and lifted out a red metal toolbox that weighed nearly 40 pounds. He had just come from the Sears on South Main Street, where he spent an hour in the tool department before choosing a Craftsman socket set, every piece stamped with a lifetime guarantee that Sears actually honored, no questions asked. He carried the box into the garage, set it on the workbench next to 3 others, and stood there for a moment, looking at what he had built over 15 years. His son watched from the doorway. That garage did not belong to a professional. Earl was a machinist at the tire plant, not a contractor, not a repairman. He fixed his own car, built his own shelves, patched his own roof, and replaced his own water heater. Every man on his block did the same. The idea of calling someone and paying them to do something you could figure out yourself was, in that world, a kind of admission of failure that nobody was ready to make. Home Depot did not exist yet. It would not open its first 2 stores in Atlanta until June of 1979. Before that, there were neighborhood hardware stores, Ace, True Value, local family operations, where the man behind the counter knew your name and could tell you which grade of sandpaper you needed without being asked. And there were Sears tool departments, which was something close to sacred ground for a certain kind of American father. Here is what almost nobody talks about. Before the big box store, before the orange apron, before the warehouse aisles that stretch a 1/4 mile and stock products you would need an engineering degree to identify, the American garage ran on 11 things, 11 specific items that every dad kept, knew how to use, and expected to pass down to his son the same way he received them from his own father. Some of these are still sitting in garages across America right now, in the back of the bottom drawer, waiting. The first was the Craftsman socket set in the red metal box. Not the plastic case that splits at the hinges, not the blow-molded tray with the foam insert that never quite holds the sockets in place. The red metal box with the hinged lid and the felt-lined tray that clicked when you closed it. Every socket stamped with a size, every piece made in the United States, and the guarantee, the one Arthur Barrows put in place when he registered the Craftsman trademark in 1927 for $500, which said plainly that if any Craftsman hand tool ever failed for any reason, you walked back into Sears and walked out with a new one. No receipt, no questions. The first was the Craftsman socket set in the red metal box. Not the plastic case that splits at the hinges, not the blow-molded tray with the foam insert that never quite holds the sockets in place. The red metal box with the hinged lid and the felt-lined tray that clicked when you closed it. Every socket stamped with a size, every piece made in the United States. And the guarantee, the one Arthur Barrows put in place when he registered the Craftsman trademark in 1927 for $500, which said plainly that if any Craftsman hand tool ever failed for any reason, you walked back into Sears and walked out with a new one. No receipt, no questions. Sears sold the Craftsman brand to Stanley Black & Decker in 2017 for $900 million. The guarantee survived the sale on paper. The tools moved to manufacturing overseas shortly after. A machinist in Akron who bought a Craftsman socket set at Sears in 1963 still has it. It still works. The sockets are still sized correctly, the ratchet still clicks cleanly, and not one piece has ever needed replacing. That set is 62 years old. The one his grandson bought at Lowe's last spring already has a cracked housing on the ratchet. That was not a policy. That was a promise. The second was the Yankee screwdriver, made by North Brothers Manufacturing in Philadelphia. Push the handle down, and the spiral mechanism inside spun the bit automatically. 3 pumps drove a number 8 wood screw flush into pine in under 4 seconds. No wrist rotation, no battery, no charger, no waiting. The spring returned the handle to the starting position between each stroke, and the bit stored in a compartment inside the handle cap, 4 different bits that swapped in and out in seconds. A Yankee number 135 cost about $1.75 in 1944, and the men who bought them then were still using them in 1974. Stanley acquired North Brothers in 1946 and kept making the Yankee into the 1980s, but by then the generation that understood its value was already thinning. When cordless drills became affordable, the Yankee disappeared from hardware store pegs. Try driving a screw in a tight corner where a drill cannot fit, or up into ceiling trim where the weight of a battery tool makes your arm shake after 30 seconds, and you will understand exactly what was lost. The clicking sound of that ratchet mechanism was the sound of Saturday afternoon getting something done. The third was the hand brace, a sweep drill with a ratchet head and a wooden handle worn smooth from decades of use. Before battery-powered drills, before corded drills became affordable for household use, your grandfather bored holes with a brace. He fitted an auger bit into the two-jaw chuck, set the lead screw of the bit against his pencil mark, and turned the sweep handle in a wide arc. The lead screw pulled the bit into the wood. Clean spirals of shaving curled up and out of the hole as he turned. No noise beyond the soft sound of wood parting. No dust cloud. No extension cord dragged across the garage floor. A Stanley No. 945 brace cost $3 in 1946 and came with a ratchet that let him reverse direction without removing the bit, essential in corners where a full sweep was impossible. The holes it cut were cleaner and less likely to split the wood than any electric drill of the era. Men carried braces in canvas tool rolls alongside their handsaws and chisels and used them well into the 1960s. Somewhere around 1970, they moved to the back of the bottom drawer, where many of them still sit today, still sharp, still functional, still waiting for someone who knows what to do with them. The fourth was the oil stone in a cedar box, a small rectangular sharpening stone, usually a combination type, coarse on one side, fine on the other, sitting in a hinged wooden box, stained dark with decades of honing oil and steel residue. Every garage had one. Your grandfather used it to put a final edge on everything the bench grinder started. Chisels, plane blades, pocket knives, the axe head before firewood season, even the kitchen scissors when your grandmother complained they were pulling instead of cutting. He would set the stone on the workbench, drip a few drops of light machine oil across the surface, hold the blade at a consistent angle, 15 to 20 degrees depending on the tool, and draw it across in long, smooth strokes, the whisper of steel on stone, the slight resistance as the wire edge formed along the back of the blade, then one light stroke on the fine side to remove it. A Norton India combination stone cost $1.75 in 1944 and lasted 30 years. When carbide-tipped tools and disposable blades arrived, the oil stone lost its purpose for most people. The sharpening habit broke. Dull tools became something you replaced rather than restored. The stone sat in its box and gathered dust. But the men who kept one never stopped. The edge it produced was finer than any factory grind, and the patience it required was exactly the kind of patience that made a garage worth having. The fifth was the pipe wrench. 2 of them, always 2. One to hold the fitting in place, one to turn it. This was not optional. Every plumber knew it. Every father who had ever fixed his own pipes knew it. You used one pipe wrench to grip what should not move, and the other to move what should. Without both, you were asking for a fitting to spin and a joint to fail behind the wall where you could not reach it. Your grandfather kept a 14-inch and an 18-inch hanging on the pegboard above the workbench, their jaws angled toward each other the way they were meant to be used. The Rigid Tool Company had been making pipe wrenches in Elyria, Ohio, since 1923, and the ones from the 1950s and 60s were cast iron and forged steel that held an adjustment without slipping under pressure. A rigid 14-inch cost $3.50 in 1958. The plumber who came to fix the same joint today charges $85 for the first hour. Every dad who owned a pipe wrench, really owned one, understood it, kept it clean, and the jaw adjusted. Saved himself, over the course of his life, several $100s in service calls for jobs that took 20 minutes to do correctly. The sixth was the handsaw, a Diston D8, if he knew what he was doing. Henry Diston started making saws in a basement in Philadelphia in 1840. By the early 20th century, Diston was the largest saw manufacturer in the world, and the D8, a 26-inch panel saw with a rosewood handle and 26-inch blade crosscut at 8 teeth per inch, was in workshops across America. Your grandfather made long cuts with it, ripped boards when necessary, and on fine Saturday mornings when there was real work to do, the sound of that Diston moving through white pine was one of the specific sounds of American home ownership in the 1950s and 60s. Here is what almost nobody knows. In 1955, the Diston Company was sold to H.K. Porter, a conglomerate based in Pittsburgh. The quality held for a few years, then declined. Saws made under the Diston name after the late 1950s are not the same tools. The men who knew the difference kept their pre-war and early post-war saws and sharpened them when needed, never once considering replacing them. The ones made before the sale are still considered among the finest hand saws ever produced. A good D8 from the 1940s, properly sharpened and set, cuts as well today as it did the year it was made. That kind of thing is not manufactured anymore. It is found at estate sales, in the back of garages, in the hands of people who understood what they had before they let it go. The seventh was the level, a Stanley 4-foot model with glass vials and cast iron ends. Not the plastic levels that flex under their own weight. Not the digital levels that need batteries. The cast iron Stanley with the machined aluminum frame and the glass bubble vials set in brass housings, accurate to 1/16 of an inch over 4 feet, and so robust that dropping it off a ladder twice was not enough to put it out of calibration. A man who hung a shelf crooked in the 1950s knew about it for decades. The shelf was there on the wall, visibly tilted, a daily reminder of the job done carelessly. The level was what stood between you and that outcome. Your grandfather checked it before every use, held it against a known flat surface, and confirmed the bubble sat centered. He kept it in a felt-lined sleeve. He did not lend it to people who might drop it. A Stanley No. 98 4-foot level cost $4 in 1960. The cast aluminum and glass level he bought then is still more accurate than most of the plastic levels sold today for $15. The material matters. The glass vial is stable across temperature ranges that make plastic expand and contract. The cast iron ends absorb impact that would crack a plastic housing. Your grandfather's level outlasted 3 of his neighbor's plastic ones and is still telling the truth. The eighth was the hand plane, a Stanley No. 5 jack plane. If the hand saw cut wood to length, the hand plane brought it to final dimension and fit. Your grandfather used it to shave the edge of a door that had swollen in summer humidity and refused to close, to flatten a board that the lumberyard had twisted slightly in the kiln, to take the slightest amount off a cabinet door so it seated flush against the frame. A few strokes, and the door closed the way it was supposed to close. Stanley had been making metal bench planes since the 1860s. The No. 5 was the most versatile, a 14-inch jack plane that could rough flatten a board or take a fine finishing cut, depending on how you set the blade. The planes made between roughly 1910 and 1960 are considered by woodworkers today to be among the best mass-produced hand tools ever made. The castings were heavy enough to hold a flat sole under hard use. The blade steel was properly hardened. A No. 5 from 1948 in good condition sells for $60 to $90 at estate sales today, because people who know hand tools understand that you cannot buy a new one of equivalent quality for twice that price. Your grandfather may not have called himself a woodworker, but when the door would not close in July, he reached for the plane and fixed it in 10 minutes, and the door closed cleanly for another 20 years. The ninth was the electric drill, a Black & Decker half-inch with a cord and a keyless chuck, purchased sometime in the mid-1960s. Black & Decker introduced the first portable electric drill for consumer use in 1916. By the 1960s, a home drill cost around $12 to $15 at Sears and weighed about 4 pounds, heavier than today's cordless models, but balanced through the handle in a way that gave you genuine control over where the bit was going. The cord was long enough to reach the work without an extension in most garages. The motor was serviceable. If the brushes wore out, you replaced the brushes. Here is what almost nobody says. Your grandfather's corded drill is still in a drawer somewhere, and it still works, because a brushed motor connected to a power outlet does not have a battery that degrades over time. The cordless drill your neighbor bought 2 years ago has a battery that is already holding 40% less charge than it did when new, and when the battery dies completely, which it will, within 4 to 6 years, the tool becomes worthless because the replacement battery often costs more than a new drill. Your grandfather's drill has been making holes for 50 years. It will make holes for 50 more. Some tools are not improved by removing the cord. They are just made more expensive to replace. The 10th was the pegboard wall. Not a specific tool, a system. A sheet of perforated hardboard screwed to the studs above the workbench, with metal hooks hung at intervals to hold every tool at eye level, in the same position, every time. Your grandfather knew where every tool was without looking. He reached for the hammer, and his hand was already at the right height. He put it back in exactly the same place when the job was done. The outline of each tool, drawn in pencil directly on the board so the empty hook showed exactly what was missing, told him at a glance what was out and what was back where it belonged. A 4x8 sheet of pegboard in 1965 cost about $1.25. A full set of hooks cost another $1. The entire organizational system, the thing that made the garage function as a working space rather than a storage space, cost less than $3 and took a Saturday afternoon to install. Today, there are garage organization systems, powder-coated steel panels with branded accessories, track systems with locking inserts, custom cabinets with soft close drawers that cost between $500 and $5,000 and accomplish exactly the same thing the pegboard accomplished for $3 in 1965. The hook holds the tool. The outline tells you when it is missing. Every father on the block understood this without anyone selling it to them. The 11th was the thing hanging on the nail by the garage door, the canvas tool roll, a rolled piece of canvas, maybe 18 inches long, tied with a leather strap. Inside, secured in individual sewn pockets, a carefully chosen set, a combination wrench or two, a pair of pliers, a screwdriver, a small adjustable wrench, a spark plug socket. 12 tools, maybe 15. Everything required to handle 90% of roadside breakdowns on a 2-lane highway in Ohio in 1962. Your grandfather drove those roads without a cell phone, without GPS, and without roadside assistance beyond whatever he had in the trunk. If the generator belt snapped on a Tuesday morning 20 miles from town, the tool roll was what stood between him and a long walk. He kept it clean. He replenished it when something wore out. He knew every tool in it by feel, in the dark, with his hand reaching into the trunk. The canvas roll went into the trunk of every car he drove from the 1940s until the late 1980s, when his son started driving and explained that you could just call someone now. That is where the roll went, into a drawer in the garage, the leather tie still wrapped around it, every tool still inside. Here is what the garage meant, before Home Depot made the weekend project into a retail event. It meant that a man in Akron, Ohio, with a machinist's paycheck and a pegboard wall, could fix almost anything that went wrong in a house without calling anyone and without spending anything beyond what the tools had already cost him years ago. He fixed the door. He replaced the faucet. He rewired the outlet. He patched the roof and rebuilt the back steps and kept the car running well past what the dealer said it was worth. The tools made this possible, but the tools were not the point. The point was the belief underneath them, that the house you lived in was your responsibility, that a problem was something you solved rather than paid someone else to solve, and that the ability to do this was worth passing on to the person who came after you. Earl Kowalski's son still has the red Craftsman box. Every socket is where it belongs. The ratchet clicks cleanly on the first pull. He has not replaced a single piece in 62 years because nothing has broken. He keeps it on the same workbench, in the same garage, in the same spot where his father set it down on a Saturday morning in October 1963. Some things were built to last that long. Most of us just forgot to notice while it was happening. Memory lane, America. One story at a time.